Alright guys, hello and welcome back to Pinky's Garage. Today I'm going to be showing you how to change your clutch out on your Mark 7 GTI. No performance pack, no LSD, open differential, so I'm going to show you how it's done. Alright guys, first step here is to take off the inlet pipe. It's going to be two 8mm hose clamps on this CTS one. Then we're just going to pull the air box out. It's pretty easy. Got to disconnect the secondary air injection and the vacuum line. You got a battery that needs to come out, two 10s, and then a 12mm bracket, 4 10s on the battery tray. And then we're just going to jack her up pretty much as high as we can. Later I had to move the jack stands to pull the subframe out, but I'm jacking it up all the way here and just getting as much room as I can to be able to pull this transmission out. Alright, now this next step is going to vary depending on your setup. I've got DFG charge pipes. I'm using 2 clamps on part of it. It's a mess, but I use 7mm hose clamps, and then I've got 3 5mm Allens right there that hold that muffler on. I cannot separate that inlet pipe from the turbo muffler, but you should be able to. And then we're moving on to the bottom side of the car. T20 socket in hand. It's going to be 4 T20 screws on the passenger side, 3 on the driver's side, and then 1 in the middle. That should come right out. Alright, and this step's not too bad. Pulling off the starter nuts. These are 13mm nuts to pull off the starter cable. Doing the ground right here. And then I'll be moving on to the power constant 12 volts cable. That one's kind of weird. It has like a plastic shroud around it. It caps on the nut itself, so you'll just be pulling that off. Then I'm moving to the fender well. Again, T20 screws, cleaning her up a little bit. There's a lot of T20 screws, but I would say there's probably about 10. Just take them all out, clean her up while you're in there. Alright, and then from there we're moving on to this charge pipe right here. It's just a 12mm T clamp, pulling the inlet pipe out itself. Work on the axles. These are 12mm triple squares. Have someone hold it with the lugs, as you can see on the right side, with a pry bars of some kind, and just spin it around, disconnect. Nice and slow, work your way around. Alright, and then here I'm moving on to the bleeder block. Just kind of disconnecting it with one little clip, and then you're going to have fluid rush out of here, so have a cap ready and pry it up. We ended up having to stick a screwdriver in this later. That cap didn't suffice. And then I kind of wrapped it around the starter cable, up and out of the way, just like this, and it stopped leaking once you get it to a certain height. Moving on to the starter cables here. They are 10mm bolts. There's 2 10mm bolts and 1 10mm nut. Be super careful. There's bushings in here, and we lost a few, but we found them later. But then there's a 10mm nut on the shifter cables themselves, kind of where they bolt to the transmission. Be super careful taking that out. It'll probably be pretty stiff on yours if you haven't taken it out yet. But then there's just a clip that holds on one cable, and then this other cable just slides right off. Not too bad.
Shifter's off.
Alright, then here we're taking off the nut for the constant 12 volts to the starter. And then we move on to the starter bolts themselves. Big old 18mm bolts. They're quite long. We had to use a breaker bar to get it off. but just two 18 millimeters top and bottom, super easy to come out. You got to get a bracket off. There's a bracket that kind of connects the grounds together, kind of some wire management bracket, but pull that off and then you can get access to the starter bolts. Here we're kind of measuring the width of the frame to put this support bar on. Just kind of measuring it to get it preset so we don't have to make too many adjustments up top. But this thing's pretty cool. It was 80 bucks at Harbor Freight. I find it quite necessary for this project. But you're just kind of setting up these black pieces onto the rail, I guess you would call it, kind of on the fender, and then putting the hooks sort of in position to chain around the motor. There's two mounting points on this block. One kind of a few inches from the dipstick, and then we ended up using the one like right next to the high pressure fuel pump as well. You can kind of see that, and then we just chained her up. Moving to the bottom side of the car again, 16 millimeter bolts. I think there's 4 of them. You're going to see 3 right here, and they are bolted into the block themselves. And then later there's going to be a 16 millimeter on the differential side of things that bolts the other way towards the driver's side. Jacking it up, I used a jack pad at first. We later swapped out to just a small piece of wood. Yeah, this jack pad wasn't a big enough surface to kind of balance it. Here it is. Here's the 16 millimeter facing the driver's side on the diff. It's kind of facing an opposite way compared to all the other bolts. It's tucked in there quite nicely. Yeah, I think you have to pull the axles out before you can get to that bolt. Then we move on to the transmission mount itself. These are all 18 millimeter bolts. You have 3 on the bottom lower portion of it, and then you have 3 on the top portion of it. Make sure you have your engine support bar mounted and stiff, the chains are torqued up before you remove this. You can see this last bolt I'm going to do, the actual entire transmission starts walking a little bit, and you're going to have to move it around to get the last bolt out, but you'll see. And then we've got the bell housing bolts up top. This is an 18 millimeter. It has a little stud on it. That's where the shifter cable nut bolts onto. And that's an 18 millimeter. And then we have, I believe, a 14 millimeter triple square right here. Yeah, 14 millimeter triple square, or a 16 millimeter socket would work as well. Get these out. And then once you have the starter bolts out, these bolts out, and the bolts on the bottom, the transmission is completely free. Kind of just taking a pry bar here to the bottom of it, getting it off the input shaft, and just prying up against that metal bell housing flange. Unfortunately, the entirety of this did not record, but the subframe is still in. We ended up having to remove the 18 millimeter bolt on the control arm right there. Just one. I'll show you guys a bit more of that here in a second. Alright. So that turned out to be quite a stressful event, so I accidentally did not record, but transmission is out, and the problem we had was this axle hub right here that goes in here was hanging up on the flywheel when we were trying to twist it out. This hub right here goes on that axle on the passenger side, and it was getting hung up on the flywheel teeth. You can kind of see some of the scrapes right there in the bottom right, about 5 o'clock, and we ended up having to take it off and then twist it, and this comes out kind of vertically, so it sits, I guess, like this, and we ended up having to take it out vertically with the bottom side down and the bell housing up top, so the diff going downwards and the bell housing on top, and it slid right out. We had to take this control arm, this A-arm bolt off, but we left everything else on. You only really have to get that off. Getting this axle out of the way is kind of a pain, but sliding that out, and then just take this transmission out vertically. We left this on, we left the shifter linkage on. Now, honestly, that is super clean. So that's a SouthBend Stage 2 endurance clutch, and it has almost 50,000 miles on it. Again, the only reason I am swapping this out is because this throwout bearing is bad. It's making a ton of noise, and you can kind of see the scoring on it here. You can kind of see the scoring on it around. I'm trying to get the lighting just right. There's scoring all the way around that, so that's the only thing I really need to replace, which is this. So it's just like that. But while we're in there, we're going to change the clutch out. Like I was saying, not a whole lot of dust for 50,000 miles. I got a SouthBend Stage 3 daily going in, but I'm just going to clean all this up. I'm going to clean out this bell housing, get it nice and clean, get all the dust off. We bent that little gasket, I guess you could call it, that metal, very thin metal ring that goes around there. We bent that, so I'm going to straighten that back out and just clean her all up, get the old flywheel off, and I'll be back. Alright, so it's a new day. Clutch, flywheel, trans is out. That's the rear main seal. Looks a little leaky, but not too bad. I mean, I don't expect anything less. Old flywheel, old clutch material. Not too bad. Not too bad surface. And this isn't too bad either. Old flywheel. A little bit of scoring. A little bit of lip right there, a little bit of lip back there. The trans is out. I've cleaned it. I used water quite a bit. I don't know if that was such a good idea. I probably wouldn't do it again, but cleaned her up. Some barkeeper's friend got that aluminum looking real good, and we just gotta swap out that throwout bearing. Put the flywheel back in, torque it to spec, and should be good. This is the new SouthBend Stage 3 Daily. It's got all new hardware, new throwout bearing. I bagged everything. That's axles, bushings, starter bracket, axle hub, transmission mount bolts, transmission mount bolts, and bell housing bolts. Then we got dog bone mount. Alright guys, so this is a pretty important step that I didn't really cover, but when you're installing the throwout bearing, you need to prime it with brake fluid. So I'm just using some basic .4 brake fluid here because I am planning on changing my brakes out in the future, in the near future, and changing the brake fluid altogether. So I'm just using some cheap .4, putting it in a solo cup, and then I'm just squeezing the throwout bearing and therefore priming it. You want to pump it out until you get no more air bubbles, and just in a solo cup, put the tip in, start pumping it up, and then install it primed, and that will help you a lot in your bleeding procedure. Alright y'all, so here's where I'm at. This transmission is a pain in the butt to get in here. Either it's hitting on the fan shroud right there, it's hitting on the actual pressure plate itself, or it's hitting on the subframe. I didn't think I was gonna have to drop the subframe, but to get it out, you don't. To get it in, I believe you do. And I think I'm just gonna try to sag it. I'm not gonna try to remove everything. I'm just gonna try to sag it a little bit. I had to move the jack stands right there and there because I was right here, but to pull the subframe out, I had to get it onto the rails there. So no, this was unique. This was an experience for me. This is the first time I'd ever done it. Pulling the subframe, that is. And in hindsight, the middle 18s you don't really need to remove. Those are for the steering rack. When you sag all of this, you don't need to touch the steering rack at all. You don't need to touch the sway bar. You don't need to touch the steering rack. Now the sway bar end links you gotta remove. Those are just 18s. And I put the control arm back there because I wanted it all to sag properly. The second you drop this thing, you're gonna have to get in alignment. The second you remove that control arm bolt, you're gonna need to get in alignment, which I did no problems. And then so it's the brackets in the back. That's an 18mm and a 16mm, and then the two 18mm bolts that are bolted to the chassis on the front side. Now you can see kind of a circle in the control arm where I'm going in right there. The circle in the control arm gives you access to that bolt, and it just sags maybe 2 to 3 inches, and that is just enough to get the differential in, because it also it's swinging. It's not just sagging, it's swinging, so you're able to kind of wiggle it around while you're installing the transmission. So we kind of start off on the jack, get it up in the jack. We kind of use to get it up above the subframe. Subframe's still in the way a little bit. You got to be really careful of the axle cups. You got to be really careful of the fan shroud, the pressure plate itself, and then use the ratchet straps to get her up. All right, so we're using the ratchet strap right here, wrapped around the gearbox. We're super close. The jack is completely out of the way. We're gonna get under and push the diff up, and I'm gonna be up here picking the bell housing up and trying to get it over the clutch right there. Ratchet strap wrapped around the engine support bar, able to get that up nice and easy. Now we're just getting the dowels squared away. There's a dowel on the front, a dowel on the back, and make sure you don't forget the little aluminum spacer that goes in between there. Once you get that spacer set, there's a spot on the top as well for it. 2 dowels, you can get the transmission lined up just fine. Alright y'all, transmission is somewhat in. We got about 4 out of the 5 bolts started, 2 on top, 2 on the bottom. We ended up removing the transmission mount, this thing right here, because when we were going in, the shifter bracket here was making contact with it, and these ratchet straps are pretty hard to lower once you lift them up. So the easiest thing to do is just remove that. We'll put it back in, no sweat. We had to end up using 2 ratchet straps, so I got one wrapped around the gearbox right here, and then one on a little tab on the diff side of things. We've just been ratcheting it up. You have to work the engine as well, lower it and lift it and lower it until you get the dowel pins lined up. There's 2 dowels, one right there and one over there. Alright, getting the bolts started here. I'm doing the starter bolts first. I like to do get the starter in and get those bolts going. Also the 18mm in the back for the shifter cable. Get the transmission mount back in. We did end up having to take it off. That's just 4, I believe, 13mm bolts. Don't quote me on that. Getting these started was kind of hard. You definitely have to move the motor around a little bit. Just 3 on the bottom, 3 on the top again. Alright, so I'm getting those bell housing bolts torqued up, the 3 on the top and the starter bolts. Now to get the transmission mount out, I had to pull the ECU, and here I'm putting it back in, along with all the associated wiring for it. It's not that difficult. Alright, here I'm doing the axle hub, spring compressed, so you need to put pressure on it while you do the 6mm Allen, and then jack it up. Jack the subframe up, start with the 18s that mount to the chassis. It's quite movable when you have it in this position, so it's easy to get started. Alright y'all, subframe is back in. Oil level sensor is plugged in. All I had to do was remove this bracket right here, this bracket right here. It's 2 16s and an 18. 2 16s on an 18 on both sides. Loosen these 18s up. One there. One there. Of course you have to have the dog bone mount out. Unplug this sensor. And then if you look way... Let me get the flashlight. If you look up through there, right there, there's an 18 that goes kind of like from here up through there, and it's an 18 that goes right to the chassis on both sides. Get that back in. You have to loosen these sway bar end links up. One there, one there. You don't even have to worry about that little triple square bit inside, just 18 takes that right off. And then you gotta worry about the and get back there. The exhaust. The exhaust has a 13 here and a 13 here. Let me try to get that on camera. So pull those out. And the problem I had is when I was reinstalling the subframe, I got all the bolts in, I zipped it all up, but this bushing was loose right here. It was completely out. And I had to drop the subframe again to be able to get that bushing inside this exhaust hanger right here. So don't do what I did. While you have the subframe hanging, go ahead and get these bolts started. Don't tighten them all the way up yet. Go ahead and get them started with both bushings installed into the hangers, and then it'll work out. Also, get these axles, go ahead and put them in the cups here. Get them just resting in there. You don't have to bolt them up or anything, because they'll get stuck like on the lip of the hub, and then you won't be able to move them, and then you could potentially mess your axles up, or CV boots or something. I got transmission mount in. Engine support bar is gone. That's a plus. Just kind of take your time with this. There's 6 bolts. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And kind of just zigzag your way around. I ended up removing this transmission mount to get the transmission in, but I put it all together. I just started these 3 on the lower, started these 3 on the upper, and you have to move the engine support bar around, wiggle the transmission around, get them all started. Just go nice and slow. I would use hand tools, no impacts, no nothing. I got the shifter cables are in, and their associated bushings, 13 mil, 13 mil, 13 mil nut. That one's a nut. This one right here. These are both just bolts, but they have 6 washers or bushings. It's kind of like one's a male, one's a female. The male goes up first, the female acts like a washer against the bolt. Get these in, put it in neutral. You can tell because you can go up and down with it. That's how you know you're in neutral. And then put the clips on. This one just slides on. I'm gonna grease this later. But now, just gotta do the starter itself. Put the axles in. They're resting in there, but we need to bolt them in. I gotta do this turbo outlet pipe, as well as the pre-charge charge pipe, which goes like right around here. Other than that, I'll get back with you. Alright guys, like I said before, subframe is in. The torque specs for these, like 18mm bolts, here, 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 and the ones in these holes are it's like 70 newton meters plus 180 degrees. I'm gonna show you a cool trick on how to do the 180 degrees. Grab yourself some acrylic paint, doesn't matter what color, and you're gonna go ahead and mark a line or a dot or whatever. I mean, it's not super complex. Mark a spot. That way when you twist them 180 degrees, you know where you're at. I mean, it's acrylic paint, and if it's something like this, kind of works for everything, but if it's super vital, like you don't want this paint getting in, like let's say you're doing an engine tear down or something, then you can just spray it off with brake cleaner once you're done. It's really not that big of a deal. And then this middle dog bone, like 96 foot-pounds, not newton meters, and 90 degrees. Again, nothing too crazy, but let's see if I can do that one right there. Maybe even mark, sorry. I don't even know if you can see that, but maybe even try to mark the chassis where the actual bolt goes onto as well. Let's see if you can do that. See? And then it'll just rotate by 180 degrees. Down here we've got subframe is torqued, oil level sensors plugged back in, dog bone is torqued, those 2 brackets back there are torqued. Axles are in, they are not torqued. These are 12mm triple squares. Here, I kind of struggled with this on my own, trying to get these axles in. What you have to do, at least on the driver's side, because the driver's side is much shorter than this, I guess, I actually had to jack this control arm up, hence the jack's right there. I just kind of jacked up right here and made it to where this axle was straighter, because as you can see, it's got quite an angle on it when it's in the air like this. Made the axle straighter because I was having a hard time putting pressure upwards to try to level this cup out and thread the bolts in. Now, once you get it right, these things just go in like butter. And then you just twist it, do the other two, twist it, do the other two. I did not have to jack this passenger side up. I did have to jack this driver's side up just a little bit to get it on. It wasn't too difficult by yourself, but you're definitely going to need a second hand to torque them though, because as you torque them, you're putting leverage against it, which is obviously going to be able to turn this. So what we're going to do to solve this problem is just put some your lug bolts in like this. You're going to take a pry bar, just shove it in there, have someone torque it 70 Newton meters on the axle bolts, 70 Newton meters, and you're just going to hold it with the pry bar while someone torques them. Other than that, the next steps are to put the battery in, put the intake in. Oh, I also did this inlet pipe, have it on the PCV. I need to do this vacuum tap, PCV, battery, intake filter box. Put the wheels back on. I bled the clutch, which was super easy. All you have to do to bleed the clutch is to take the cap off of the bleeder, just like this. Take the cap off, and then I used a 3/8 inch open end socket, but I think it's actually a 9mm. I just don't have a 9mm on hand. Just crack it open. Now be super careful. When I had a buddy in there pressing on the clutch pedal, this thing just shoots brake fluid out. So all I did was top this off, top this brake fluid reservoir off, had someone press the clutch a few times, some air came out, and then it just started spewing straight fluid. The pedal is nice and stiff, so I don't think we have any problems there. Obviously we need to drive it, test it out, see if it's sticking or anything, but I think we're in good shape. And I'll get back to you when I do all this. All right, y'all, MK7 GTI clutch swap is in the books. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you for sticking through my trials and tribulations on this one. It was quite a difficult job, but we muscled through it. I appreciate it if y'all would just like, comment, and subscribe. Thank y'all.